The broom clattered to the floor as two Marines collapsed beside it. In the stunned silence that followed, 40 Navy SEAL recruits realized their understanding of strength, skill, and survival had just been shattered by a man they'd ignored for months. The quiet janitor who emptied their trash and mopped their floors had moved with precision that defied everything they thought they knew about combat. From which military base are you watching this story unfold today? If this tale of hidden warriors resonates with you, consider subscribing to hear more untold stories from the shadows of elite training. Camp Coronado's Bud/S facility operated under the relentless California sun with mechanical precision. Every morning at 0500, the same routine began. Physical training that pushed human limits, classroom instruction on advanced tactics, weapons training that demanded perfection, and psychological conditioning designed to break the weak while forging the exceptional. The compound itself sprawled across acres of specialized training areas, obstacle courses that had claimed countless dreams, and barracks where future SEALs learned that comfort was a luxury they could no longer afford. Marcus Chen had been part of the scenery for 18 months. Just another face in the support staff who kept the machinery of elite training running smoothly. At 62, he moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had learned to conserve energy for what mattered. His gray custodial uniform hung loose on a frame that appeared unremarkable, neither tall nor imposing. Thinning black hair showed streaks of silver, and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a weathered face that suggested decades of quiet service. The recruits barely noticed him as he wheeled his cart through their world, collecting their discarded energy bar wrappers and sweat-soaked towels. Every morning, Marcus arrived precisely at 0445, 15 minutes before the base officially came alive. He preferred the quiet moments when the training grounds lay empty, when he could work without the constant scrutiny of instructors and the desperate energy of young men fighting for their military futures. His routine never varied. Equipment rooms first, then the classroom areas, followed by the mess hall, and finally the training grounds themselves. Each space received the same methodical attention, the same quiet efficiency that had marked his approach to everything for as long as anyone could remember. The recruits of Class 347 had been grinding through their training cycle for 14 weeks. 47 had started, 40 remained. The dropouts came steadily, claimed by injury, inability, or the crushing realization that their minds and bodies simply couldn't meet the impossible standards demanded of them. Those who survived lived in a constant state of controlled desperation, pushing themselves beyond what they'd thought possible while knowing that tomorrow would demand even more. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Rodriguez ran the program with the precision of a Swiss chronometer and the mercy of a tsunami. 20 years of active duty had carved her into something both inspiring and terrifying. She demanded excellence not because she enjoyed watching young men suffer, but because she understood the brutal mathematics of special operations. Every shortcut in training became a liability in the field. Every moment of weakness could cost lives. The recruits feared her, respected her, and would have followed her into hell without hesitation. Today we focus on hand-to-hand combat assessment, Rodriguez announced to the assembled class on a Tuesday morning that would prove unforgettable. You'll be working with Marine Corps instructors who volunteered to help evaluate your progress. She gestured toward two Marines standing at attention beside the training mats. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres and Sergeant First Class David Kim represented everything the recruits aspired to become. Torres stood 6'3" with shoulders that looked capable of supporting bridge construction. His scarred knuckles and confident posture spoke of countless training sessions and real-world encounters. Kim was smaller but moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd turned violence into an art form. Both Marines carried themselves with the quiet arrogance of warriors who'd proven their worth in places most people couldn't pronounce. The recruits formed a circle around the designated sparring area, their faces displaying the mixture of anticipation and anxiety that came with being evaluated by outsiders. These weren't their usual instructors who'd been measuring their progress week by week. These were strangers who would judge them with fresh eyes and higher standards. Marcus wheeled his cart into the gymnasium, following his normal routine of collecting trash and ensuring the facility remained pristine. His timing was unfortunate. The session had begun earlier than usual, and he found himself entering a space filled with intense focus and barely controlled aggression. A wise man would have withdrawn quietly, returned when the space was empty. Marcus was undoubtedly wise, but he was also committed to his schedule with the devotion of someone who understood that reliability was its own form of integrity. He positioned himself along the far wall, moving with practiced invisibility as he began his work. The recruits might as well have been alone. In their world, support staff occupied the same category as furniture, present but irrelevant to their primary concerns. Marcus had learned to move through their space like a ghost, completing his tasks while remaining beneath the threshold of their awareness. "Anderson, you're up first," Rodriguez called out. Recruit James Anderson stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. At 24, he'd been a collegiate wrestler before deciding that civilian competition couldn't satisfy his need for challenge. His hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them, not from fear but from the adrenaline surge that came with knowing his performance would be measured, recorded, and weighed against his future. Torres stepped onto the mat with casual confidence. "Rules are simple," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is assessment, not warfare. We're measuring technique, adaptability, and composure under pressure. No one's trying to end anyone's career today." The match lasted 90 seconds. Anderson fought with heart, determination, and everything his training had taught him. Torres fought with the effortless superiority of someone who'd spent years refining his craft against opponents who wanted to kill him. When it ended, Anderson lay on his back, gasping for air while Torres extended a hand to help him up. "Good effort," Torres said, and meant it. "Your ground game needs work, but you've got heart." The pattern continued through 6 more recruits. Each young man entered the circle with hope and determination. Each left with a clearer understanding of how far they still had to travel. The Marines weren't cruel or dismissive. They were simply operating at a level that made the gap in skill impossible to ignore. Marcus continued his work, emptying trash receptacles and wiping down equipment with the same methodical approach he brought to everything. He'd seen thousands of these sessions over the months, watching young warriors discover their limitations while pushing toward excellence. There was something beautiful about the process, he thought. The honest assessment of capability, the willingness to fail in service of eventual success. His cart squeaked slightly as he moved between cleaning stations. The sound was barely audible over the grunts and impacts of combat training, but it drew the attention of recruit David Park, who'd been eliminated in his match just minutes earlier. Park noticed the old janitor for perhaps the first time, really looked at him rather than simply registering his presence as background noise. There was something about the way Marcus moved. Nothing dramatic or attention-grabbing, but a certain economy of motion that suggested awareness beyond what his appearance implied. Park found himself watching as Marcus navigated between equipment and personnel with minimal wasted movement, never bumping into obstacles or people, never hesitating about his next action. "Martinez, you're up," Rodriguez called out, interrupting Park's observations. Recruit Carlos Martinez had been a Marine himself before deciding to pursue SEAL training. His previous service gave him confidence that the others lacked, and it showed in his posture as he approached the mat. Kim stepped forward as Martinez's opponent, recognizing a fellow Marine with a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Semper Fi," he said quietly, then settled into a combat stance that looked deceptively relaxed. This match lasted longer than the others. Martinez's Marine training served him well, giving him techniques and instincts that pushed Kim harder than the previous recruits had managed. For 3 minutes, the 2 Marines engaged in a complex dance of strikes, blocks, grapples, and counters that demonstrated why both branches were considered elite. When it ended, Martinez had acquitted himself admirably despite losing. Kim helped him to his feet with obvious respect. "Outstanding work, Marine. Your striking combinations are solid, but watch your defensive positioning when transitioning between ranges." The session was approaching its end when fate intervened in the form of an equipment malfunction. The heavy bag that had been secured to the ceiling mounting for months chose that moment to fail. The chain snapped with a metallic crack that echoed through the gymnasium, sending 300 pounds of sand and leather plummeting toward the ground, directly toward recruit Tommy Chun, who'd been adjusting his boots with his back to the falling hazard. Time seemed to slow as 40 minds processed the danger simultaneously. Chen was perhaps 2 seconds from serious injury or death. The heavy bag's trajectory was unavoidable. He was too far from safety to dodge, too focused on his equipment to notice the threat bearing down on him. Marcus moved. Not the careful, economical movement he'd displayed while cleaning. Not the invisible shuffle of support staff trying to avoid notice. He moved with explosive precision that defied every assumption anyone had made about age, capability, and potential. In the first second, he'd crossed 15 feet of floor space with fluid efficiency that spoke of thousands of hours of training. His cleaning cart lay abandoned in his wake, forgotten as completely as his previous identity. The old janitor had vanished, replaced by something that moved with the deadly grace of a predator. In the second, he'd reached Chen and executed a perfect combat role that carried both men clear of the impact zone. The movement was so smooth, so professionally executed that it looked choreographed. Chen found himself deposited safely on the floor several feet away, completely unharmed and utterly confused about what had just happened. The heavy bag crashed to the floor with thunderous impact, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. The sound reverberated through the gymnasium like a bomb blast, causing everyone to flinch instinctively. Everyone except Marcus, who rose from his protective role with fluid grace and immediately began assessing the area for additional hazards. The gymnasium fell silent except for the settling debris and the sound of 40 recruits trying to process what they'd witnessed. The quiet janitor they'd ignored for months had just executed a rescue that demonstrated training, reflexes, and capability that shouldn't have existed in someone of his apparent background. Rodriguez stared at Marcus with professional assessment that went far beyond surprise. She'd seen enough combat veterans to recognize the signs, and Marcus was displaying behavior patterns that suggested extensive military experience. The way he'd evaluated the threat, calculated the response, and executed the solution spoke of training that went far beyond basic military service. "Everyone okay?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying an edge of command that hadn't been there during his months of invisible service. The question was directed at Chen, but his eyes were scanning the entire room, cataloging personnel and potential hazards with practiced efficiency. Chen nodded, still too stunned to speak. He'd gone from potential victim to protected asset in less than 3 seconds, saved by someone he'd never bothered to acknowledge as fully human. "Nice work," Torres said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Marcus's expression flickered almost imperceptibly, a shadow of something that might have been regret, or perhaps resignation. "Basic training," he replied, but the answer rang false to everyone present. Kim stepped closer, his trained eye cataloging details that civilian observers might miss. "Basic training doesn't teach roles like that," he said quietly. "That was advanced close-quarters protection. Military level. Or higher," Rodriguez added, her voice thoughtful. Marcus began collecting cleaning supplies that had spilled from his cart during the rescue, his movements returning to the careful economy they'd shown before. But the illusion was broken. Everyone present had seen what lay beneath the surface, and that knowledge couldn't be erased. "Just glad everyone's safe," Marcus said, avoiding eye contact as he worked to restore order to his equipment. That's when things went wrong. Torres had spent enough years in combat zones to develop instincts about hidden threats. Something about Marcus's deflection triggered those instincts, making him wonder what else the old janitor might be hiding. In a moment of poor judgment, he decided to push for answers. "Come on, old-timer," Torres said, stepping closer with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others into compliance. "Nobody moves like that without serious training. What's your real story?" Marcus continued cleaning without looking up. "No story," he replied quietly. "Just doing my job." "Bullshit," Kim added, moving to flank Marcus from the other side. The two Marines were employing intimidation tactics that had proven effective in countless situations, using their size and presence to pressure someone into revealing information. They were about to learn why those tactics had limitations. "Sergeants, that's enough," Rodriguez interjected, sensing the situation deteriorating. But Torres was committed to his course of action. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Torres demanded, reaching out to grab Marcus's shoulder and force eye contact. The broom clattered to the floor as two Marines collapsed beside it. What happened next occurred so quickly that most witnesses would later struggle to provide coherent accounts. Their minds simply couldn't process the speed and precision of Marcus's response to what he perceived as a physical assault. Torres's hand never reached its target. Marcus moved with impossible fluidity, redirecting the Marine's momentum while applying targeted pressure to nerve clusters that caused immediate motor dysfunction. Torres found himself on the floor, paralyzed by his own nervous system's response to precisely applied pressure points. Kim reacted to his partner's collapse with trained aggression, launching a strike intended to neutralize what he now recognized as a serious threat. Marcus responded by demonstrating why his true identity had remained hidden for so long. The old janitor who'd shuffled invisibly through their world for months revealed himself as something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Kim's strike was intercepted, redirected, and answered with surgical precision that put the Marine on the floor beside his partner. Both Marines lay unconscious, victims of techniques that spoke of training beyond anything the recruits had imagined possible. The gymnasium fell into shocked silence. 40 Navy SEAL candidates stared at a man they'd dismissed as irrelevant support staff, trying to reconcile what they'd witnessed with everything they thought they knew about combat capability. Marcus looked down at the two unconscious Marines with an expression that mixed regret with resignation. He'd maintained his cover for 18 months, living quietly in the shadows while young warriors trained for futures he'd already survived. Now that careful anonymity lay in ruins because two Marines had pushed too hard at the wrong moment. "Are they?" Rodriguez began, kneeling beside Torres to check his pulse. "They'll be fine," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone describing a medical procedure. "Temporary neural disruption. They'll regain consciousness in approximately 90 seconds with no permanent damage." The accuracy of his medical assessment raised additional questions about his background. Rodriguez looked up at him with professional curiosity that had evolved far beyond surprise. "Who are you?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, staring at the unconscious Marines while calculating his options. His cover was blown beyond repair. The federal databases would be accessed within hours. His carefully constructed identity would crumble under investigation. "Marcus Chen," he replied finally. "Custodial staff." "Try again," Rodriguez said firmly. "Nobody learns techniques like that in basic training." Park, who'd been watching Marcus with interest before the incident, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, I noticed something about the way you moved earlier. Before this happened, you moved like someone who'd seen combat." Marcus's eyes met Park's with acknowledgement of the young man's perception. "Observe it," he said quietly. Torres stirred on the floor, his motor functions returning as Marcus had predicted. Kim followed moments later, both Marines struggling to understand what had happened to them. "What the hell?" Torres muttered, testing his limbs for proper function. "You were neutralized," Rodriguez explained, helping him sit up. "By our janitor." Kim stared at Marcus with new respect mixed with professional wariness. "Those weren't standard military techniques," he said carefully. "That was something else entirely." Marcus began moving toward his cart, clearly intending to continue his cleaning routine as if nothing had happened. The gesture struck everyone present as surreal given what they'd just witnessed. "Where do you think you're going?" Rodriguez asked. "Back to work," Marcus replied simply. "Schedule to maintain." "I don't think so," Torres said, getting to his feet with obvious difficulty. "Someone with your skills doesn't end up pushing a broom without a story." Marcus paused, his hand resting on the cart's handle. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight that commanded absolute attention. "Some stories are classified above your pay grade, Sergeant." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Rodriguez felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her mind. Someone with advanced combat training, medical knowledge, and security clearance high enough to make demands of Marine staff sergeants didn't end up in custodial work by accident. She was about to ask more questions when her secure communication device buzzed with an urgent message. As she read the text, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Everyone out," she announced suddenly. "Training session is over." "Ma'am?" Torres asked, confused by the abrupt dismissal. "Out. Now," Rodriguez repeated, her tone leaving no room for discussion. The recruits began filing out reluctantly, their minds churning with questions about what they'd witnessed. Most had trouble accepting that the invisible old man who'd cleaned up after them possessed capabilities that exceeded their own by orders of magnitude. Park lingered near the door, looking back at Marcus with obvious curiosity. He'd been right about sensing something different about the janitor's movement patterns. His instincts had detected capabilities that everyone else had missed. As the gymnasium emptied, Rodriguez approached Marcus with careful respect. "That message was about you," she said quietly. "Seems your little demonstration triggered some automatic alerts in federal databases." Marcus nodded without surprise. "I figured it would. They want to talk to you." "They usually do." Rodriguez studied his face, noting the resignation in his expression. "How long have you been hiding here?" 18 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. Marcus replied with precision that spoke of someone counting time in confinement. Hiding from what? Marcus was quiet for so long that Rodriguez wondered if he intended to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of experiences that most people couldn't imagine. From questions I couldn't answer. From missions I couldn't forget. From a life that ended when my team didn't come home. The pieces of his story were beginning to form a picture that Rodriguez recognized. She'd seen it before in other warriors who'd pushed too far, seen too much, survived things that cost them pieces of their souls. The best operators sometimes needed to disappear for a while, to find themselves again in quiet corners where the demands of duty couldn't reach them. "What was your unit?" she asked gently. Marcus's smile held no humor. "The kind that doesn't officially exist." Dev grew deeper. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. There were units within the special operations community that operated in shadows so deep that most military personnel never learned their names. If Marcus had served in one of those organizations, his presence at a SEAL training facility represented something far more complex than simple hiding. "Are you in danger?" she asked. "Not anymore," Marcus replied. "But my anonymity was the price of peace. Now that's gone." They were interrupted by the arrival of 3 men in civilian clothing who moved with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. The lead agent, a thin man with sharp eyes, approached with credentials already displayed. "Mr. Chen," the agent said, using Marcus's cover name despite obviously knowing better. "We need to discuss your recent activities." Marcus sighed deeply, the sound of someone accepting inevitable consequences. "Agent Morrison," he replied, demonstrating familiarity that spoke of previous encounters. "You know the drill," Morrison continued. "Certain capabilities can't remain hidden indefinitely. Your demonstration this afternoon triggered security protocols." "I was protecting a young man from injury," Marcus said firmly. "We understand that. But the techniques you employed raise questions that require answers." Rodriguez watched the exchange with growing unease. These weren't local investigators responding to an incident report. These were federal operatives who'd arrived within hours of Marcus's exposure, suggesting surveillance systems and response protocols that went far beyond normal law enforcement. "Is he under arrest?" she asked. Morrison looked at her with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a child. "Mr. Chen's situation is more complex than simple criminal justice, Commander. His cooperation is voluntary, but his expertise is needed elsewhere." Marcus began removing his custodial uniform, revealing underneath clothing that looked more appropriate for field operations. The transformation was subtle but complete, changing him from invisible support staff into something recognizably dangerous. "My gear?" he asked Morrison. "Already loaded in the vehicle." Rodriguez stared in amazement as Marcus was revealed as someone who'd been prepared for rapid departure at any moment. His months of custodial work hadn't been hiding so much as waiting. "Gear for what?" she demanded. Morrison answered while Marcus finished his preparations. "Let's just say that certain international situations require personnel with very specific skill sets. Mr. Chen's vacation is officially over." Marcus shouldered a equipment bag that had been waiting in Morrison's vehicle, the movement revealing muscles that his custodial uniform had concealed. "Commander Rodriguez," he said, offering his hand with formal respect. "It's been an honor watching your recruits develop." "Wait," she said, taking his hand while processing rapid mental calculations. "You weren't just hiding here. You were evaluating them." Marcus's smile held genuine warmth for the first time. "Some of them show exceptional promise. Park in particular has instincts that can't be taught." "You've been talent scouting," Rodriguez realized. "For what kind of missions?" The kind that require more than exceptional physical capability, Marcus replied cryptically. The kind that need people who can think, adapt, and maintain moral clarity in impossible situations. Morrison was growing impatient with the extended farewell. We need to move, he announced. As Marcus walked toward the exit, Rodriguez called after him. What should I tell the recruits? He paused, considering her question carefully. Tell them that strength isn't always visible, he said finally. That the most dangerous people are often those who choose not to display their capabilities. And that real warriors know the difference between fighting because they can and fighting because they must. The federal agents escorted Marcus toward a convoy of black SUVs that had appeared in the facility's parking area. Rodriguez watched from the gymnasium entrance as the man who'd posed as a janitor for 18 months was transformed back into whatever he'd been before. As the vehicles pulled away, she found herself wondering about the missions that required warriors of Marcus's caliber. What threats existed that demanded operators capable of hiding in plain sight while evaluating the next generation of Special Forces personnel? The recruits would have questions, she knew. 40 young warriors who discovered that their assumptions about capability, threat, and hidden potential had been completely wrong. They'd witnessed something that would change their understanding of what was possible, both in terms of combat effectiveness and operational deception. Park appeared at her shoulder, having ignored her earlier dismissal to observe Marcus's departure. Commander, he said quietly. That wasn't random, was it? Him being here. Rodriguez looked at the intelligent young man who'd noticed what others had missed. No, recruit. I don't think anything about Marcus Chen was random. He was testing us, Park continued. All of us. Not just physical capability, but awareness, judgment, character. What makes you think that? The way he looked at us, Park explained. Not like support staff observing their superiors. Like someone evaluating potential assets. Rodriguez nodded slowly, confirming what Park had intuited. And what do you think his assessment was? Park was quiet for a moment, processing implications that extended far beyond normal training scenarios. I think some of us passed tests we didn't know we were taking, he said finally. As they stood watching the dust settle from the departed convoy, Rodriguez wondered which of her recruits might receive visitors in the months ahead. Men like Marcus Chen didn't evaluate personnel for standard military assignments. They identified candidates for missions that existed in the deepest shadows of national security. The broom Marcus had dropped during his confrontation with the Marines lay forgotten on the gymnasium floor, abandoned when 18 months of careful cover had been blown in seconds. Rodriguez picked it up, studying the ordinary cleaning tool that had been wielded by someone extraordinary. Tomorrow morning at 0445, someone else would arrive to maintain the facility's cleanliness. Someone ordinary, visible, and unremarkable. Someone who was exactly what they appeared to be. But the 40 recruits of Class 347 would never again assume that appearance revealed capability, or that quiet service indicated limited potential. They'd learned that the most dangerous warriors were often those who chose to remain hidden, and that true strength was measured not by what someone displayed, but by what they chose to conceal. The lesson would serve them well in the missions ahead, where enemies rarely announced their capabilities and allies sometimes wore the masks of ordinary people doing unremarkable jobs. In a world where deception was survival and appearance meant nothing, Marcus Chen had given them the most valuable training they would ever receive. They just didn't know it yet.